Cheers! Welcome to Culture Night,
where each week we're doing fancy wine and watch movies that are in some way culturally significant. I'm Andrew.
And I'm Sarah, and we are back for a new season. Woo!
Season 6.
I know. 6? Mm-hmm. It kind of feels like not enough, but maybe it's because we've been watching a lot of movies lately that...
Yeah, the first season was like 3 seasons in one.
It was.
It was a whole lot. So.
Yeah. Anyways, so this is season 6, episode 1, the first episode of our space season, and we're glad to be back.
Yeah. Hopping into podcast business, looks like it's kind of like a recap of our rom-com season, which was a bit of a letdown.
Yes. So I averaged our scores just to see, and I think your average score was a 5.6 and mine was a 5.1.
If you take out the last 3 weeks, it was probably much lower.
Oh yeah. And the 3-week average, yours was like a 8.6 and because I looked at those because our last 3 were high and mine was like a 7.8 or something. Like, yeah, I think I was afraid of liking them too much and just being like, I'm a girl, I love rom-coms for those last 3, The Notebook, Crazy Rich Asians, and Palm Springs. I was a little more conservative in my scores, and you were just like out there with them. Yeah,
we ended strong. I mean, we started with some classics, which I had high hopes for, but they just weren't very good.
Yeah.
I think we kind of need to do a similar season, like an adjacent season where we focus just on like 80s rom-coms.
Yes.
I
think there's a lot of like specific rom-com groups that we could look at. So we also talked about doing like high school rom-coms, because I feel like there's a lot of those too that we kind of pulled those out because we didn't really want to lean too much into those. 80s, I think, agree, would be really good. Even 90s, I think there's probably a decent number.
The 90s high school ones, the 80s Brat Pack, like there's some good pockets there. But I think as we get further back in time, as we saw, it's
not going to meet the mold that we have come to expect. Yeah. And they haven't aged as well because we have progressed a little bit as a society.
Not necessarily they couldn't have been made. It's just like the humor didn't land as much, I guess.
For sure. I didn't write this in podcast business, but one more quick thing on the note of rom-coms is that I did update. I listened to the Crazy Rich Asians book like a week or so ago, and I just am happy to report that it is pretty good. The film adaptation is very good of the book. There's like a little bit more behind the scenes, like family details and stuff, like of some of the like offshoots of people.
I think you were saying it's like basically like a screenplay. It's very similar to the movie. I
had low expectations of how it was going to compare to the movie, but I was actually pretty impressed. So, I mean, it did get a little boring because I was like, okay, I've seen this, but I will say it helped me to see the movie because there are so many like family characters that I'm like, okay, that's this one. And like, I was able to picture the actors from the movie. So it was a lot to follow if you haven't seen the movie, but it was very good. I highly enjoyed it.
Cool.
So we have now, that wraps up all of our rom-com. Well, I guess not, because we are going to go into a quick slept on it on Palm Springs, but just our overall thoughts on rom-coms, and we are excited to hop into space. I think it's going to be a really hard pivot into something just completely different.
Before we do that though, let's hop into what we're drinking this week.
Oh, I wasn't ready for that. I'm so excited.
The 2018 Tobin James Silver Reserve Zinfandel.
Tobin James, we're back. I'm so excited. This is what got me through today, was knowing we were going to have some Tobin James.
So let's give it a sniff test.
It just smells so different from everything.
Yeah, a lot of berry and jammy there, our favorite ones.
And as our loyal listeners will know, it has been a while since we've done the last podcast, but I just already know that this is so much better than everything we had during the rom-com season. Yeah, jammy. Tart cherry on the nose. I haven't even tasted it yet, but that's just
It's kind of tart, almost just a little bitter on the tongue there. Hopefully we've aged it well enough.
Right. Being from 2018.
Kind of alcohol forward.
But we also just opened it, so I'm hoping that letting it air out a little bit will open it up a little bit. But it does taste very good. It's a different quality.
For sure. Definitely has much more complexity than the wines we drank last season.
And just quick note, I don't know when this is going to come out in the grand scheme of our actual real life, but we do have to shout out that we are actually going to Tobin James.
Going back to Tobin James.
Yes, we have been before, but we are having a trip out to California in the next couple of weeks, and we are going to actually go to Tobin James and drink some fresh, hot off the vine wine.
This will probably air after
It will definitely air after we've been there, but we will hopefully come back with some more bottles and some fresh stories of being out in Paso Robles, California.
Yeah, so this will be my third time to Paso Robles and third time to Tobin James, your second time. And we'll also be exploring a bunch more wineries in the area.
Maybe we'll do a season of the podcast where we just drink wines we got on our trip. That's ambitious thinking that we're going to bring home that much.
That'd be a lot of wines. Maybe we can do a little mini pod from out there though.
Ooh, that'd be fun. Stay tuned or go back and listen if you, I don't know when all this will happen in the grand scheme of things, but hopefully some fun Tobin James content coming your way.
Cool. So next up is our Slept On It segment.
Yes, we are going to just real quick revisit Palm Springs since we didn't get to do any of the Slept On It fact snacks situation from Palm Springs from the rom-com season. So does your rating change after sleeping on it? You rated it an 8.8 and I rated it a 6.2.
I don't think so. I rated it pretty high and I still really liked it. And I would be interested in watching it again. Going back to like my old school like rubric for how I kind of scored these things. Wasn't super like quotable. It is rewatchable. I did enjoy watching it. If it was on, I would continue watching it. It wasn't necessarily as impactful on pop culture, being that it's a new movie, but I do feel like it had some interesting twists on some existing like classic movies like Groundhog Day.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I am going to bump it up because I did really like it. And I'm kind of, side note, we have watched like a ton of movies in the last 6 weeks. We've just really started getting into it and it's been killing us not to podcast them. But I'm kind of surprised that in that mix, we haven't one night just been like, let's rewatch that again because we both really enjoyed this movie. And it was one that really lingered about like, oh, and that happened. Like I just kept remembering stuff as it went on. So I think I'll bump it up from a 6.2 to a 7.3.
Okay.
But
now let's get some fact snacks.
Oh, that was really loud. All right. So I just have a couple of quick fact snacks. So this whole movie had a budget of $5 million. Whereas from the article I was reading, it looks like nowadays most movies have at least like a $40 million budget-ish. So it was definitely very low budget. And they shot the whole thing in 22 days. So it was very condensed. I also think I read that they shot all of the wedding scenes. So any scene where they're at the ceremony or the reception in 4 days. So they really did all of that really condensed.
It'd be so confusing too to have filmed all that, but you're also filming like the same scene, the same actual thing multiple times. It's crazy. And
there was something that I think her name's Christine Milioti, whoever played the lead girl, I think her name was Sarah, that she had like her whole script was so scribbled on because they were shooting so many things out of order that she went through the script herself. She did all this work herself and was like, okay, this happened after this, but before this, and just to like kind of help keep her in the timeline of what was going on in the movie, which I think is very impressive because it was a lot to follow as a viewer.
Easily get lost, especially if you go back and reshoot any of that. Would be just really tough to keep on top of and how you're supposed to react and what your character knows at that point.
Yeah, it definitely. I can't imagine filming it. Just watching it was tricky. That filming it must have been wild. This was a movie that premiered at Sundance and did very well at the film festival. And for the like small budget that it had, it just has blown everybody's expectations out of the water. I think one of my favorite things I read from this article was that the writer and director, like once they got the movie picked up, they sat down at the director's house and used her like Playmobil, like kids toys to story block the entire movie for like, I think they had 3 weeks and they used that to like lay out every scene that they were going to need to shoot and kind of like figure out how they were going to do it. And they used it with like Legos.
Weird.
And just like the mental image was amazing.
I'm just like kind of picturing them like moving them around as if they're like playing an actual like Lego simulation.
They had little like figurine stand-ins for the two main characters. I thought that was a very good mental image. Andy Samberg has been quoted as saying that SNL and filming the digital shorts, because they did those on such a short turnaround times, like sometimes filming them, like doing the whole thing within like 48 hours, really helped him prepare for the crunched timeline of filming this movie. But that Christine Milioti said that she was terrified and that she like has never had to work under such time constraints. And like sometimes you'd only have 2 takes to get like this entire monologue, and it really forced her to like put it all out there and just like commit. When I feel like sometimes you need a take or two, I'm sure, to like figure out what the vibe of the scene is. And she just like, you just had to go. Yeah. I
think that there's some directors that want to retake the scene like 100 different times. And some of them that they want to take like 100 times and just, they know they're going to throw away the first 90. They just like want to get the character to really stop thinking about what they're doing and just, detach. And there's other directors that I feel like they just take one take and they're like, that's it. That's what it was. And they move on. That I can see that being really tough to adapt if you're not used to that, to either one.
100%.
Like, it's not all movies are made the same way. Like it's just, you don't know what you're getting into, but I can kind of see why when actors find a director that they like and like their style, that they do a whole bunch of recurring ones, maybe with that same director.
Yeah, I feel like that must be so tough. Like, it's not something I hadn't really thought about until like all these rewatch podcasts and things have started coming out, and just hearing from the actors of like, oh, well, I could tell this person was directing because I'm so different. And especially, I didn't realize TV shows often had different directors for every episode. And I just imagine finding continuity there as a character would be really hard.
Different directors, different writers, just crazy.
Yeah. Hollywood's wild, man. My next note is that Sandberg fought really hard to keep the fact that it's a time loop out of the trailer, which I loved because he was like, there's still word of mouth. Like, there's the internet. People are going to find out about it. But he like wanted to keep as many people from knowing that as possible. And as someone who had no idea what the movie was about and watching it for the first time completely blind, amazing.
Yeah. That's why I just love knowing nothing about a movie before I jump in whenever possible, because you get to go through that whole ride. If you know about it, it's kind of like you see like, oh, I see what they were setting up there. And it's not nearly as fun as being like, oh, whoa, what the heck? This guy just shot him with an arrow. Like, just crazy.
For sure. And I that's something I really appreciate about you, is that you have kind of pulled me into your ways, and I've been enjoying that ride for movies for sure.
Same time, I feel like trailers have gotten exponentially worse in the last like decade or two, where they just want to show everything in the trailer.
All the funny jokes.
Kills me.
Yeah. All right. And then my last note is that one of the writers has said in an interview that Andy's character spends more than 40 years stuck in the loop. Like, that's like the story they told themselves. So that is equivalent to more than 14,600 days of doing that same day over and over again. 14,000 days. That's long. I mean, that's longer than we've been alive.
Yeah. I could see you getting really good at like knowing how that day, plays out. That's crazy.
That's like way more than I anticipated watching it, but like, oh my God, no wonder he tried to kill himself so many times.
I think they said it in the movie Groundhog Day. It's like he'd repeated that day like 1,000 years or something. Like, just a crazy amount of time.
Oh man.
Yeah.
That's crazy. Also, apparently, Christine Milioti had never seen Groundhog's Day and still hasn't seen it. Or I mean, at least whenever this article came out, I don't remember what date it was from, but she hadn't seen it going into it. So she had like no context.
Yeah.
Which I thought was interesting. So that wraps up my fact snacks. I didn't look too terribly deep, but it was fun to kind of hear some of those things. Especially, I still just like am imagining the little figurines of trying to story block the movie. I think that's hilarious.
They should do more that way.
Oh my gosh, 100%.
Okay, so wraps up.
We are officially done with rom-coms.
Oh, out of there. So now let's hop into this space season. So what are we watching tonight?
Tonight we are watching Star Trek: The Motion Picture from 1979. It is rated G, which surprised me.
Well, I think we kind of have found that after you go like for the early 80s, G was just kind of most movies.
True.
And especially for things like Space Odyssey, like doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to be what our idea of G is. So we'll see how that plays out and see if it was a modern day G or an OG.
Oh no, that's how I know that you're feeling tired tonight, when you got already ripping out the jokes like that.
Well, let's quickly hop into our time machine then. We are back to 1979, where the top 3 movies released that year were Superman, grossing $93 million, The Amityville Horror, grossing $86 million, followed by Rocky II, grossing $85 million. I've seen Rocky II, have not seen the other two.
Honestly, I've probably seen Superman. My dad really loved all of those like action or like superhero movies, but I can't confirm or deny that I've seen any of them.
Yeah, I'd be interested in watching the Amityville Horror sometime, maybe with spooky season coming up.
Oh God.
Can force you into watching that one. Top 3 songs released that year were My Sharona by The Knack, Bad Girls by Donna Summer, and La Freak by Chic. Or Chick.
It's not Chick.
Never know.
I'm pretty sure I know all of those. I at least know My Sharona and La Freak. I'm sure I know Bad Girls if I hear it, but I couldn't think of it off the top of my head when I was looking at this earlier.
Definitely know the first one. Probably know the second two, but I'd have to hear them to know for sure. Have you seen the original Star Trek before?
I have not.
I have not either. I have seen the 2009 reboot. I don't know how much of that is actually like related to this at all. I've not watched much of the actual series at all before. Maybe like an episode here or there, like bits and pieces of reruns from the various generations of Star Trek, but I've not really been a huge Star Trek person myself.
Yeah. I have not seen the show. I have not seen any of the movies. I would, if you showed me like a picture of a scene from it, I would know it's from Star Trek, but like, I don't really know much past that. So as I was telling you earlier, I'm not super excited about this, but I feel like culturally it's one of those where it's like, almost like 2001: A Space Odyssey. I know that other things will kind of reference this, or like even especially just like in TV shows, like in our everyday watch, that I feel like we'll see a lot of.
Maybe I feel like more of that is probably based on the show itself than necessarily the movie, but we'll see. I am interested to see, a bunch of young. William Shatner is Captain Kirk. I feel like he's been old, like the same age for most of our lives. That would be interesting to kind of go back and see him acting in his like flagship role.
Yeah. I feel like whenever I picture any of the characters from Star Trek, it's also really hard not to say Star Wars or like any of the
people will fight you over this one.
I know. And it's not meaning to. I don't know. We've already done Star Wars so much that I think that's what's in my head. But I picture them all the same age, like never aging, from like the pictures I've seen from the original show, movie, whatever. And then the reboot, like I remember when that came out. I just feel like they haven't aged, but I know that is very much not true. So we'll see when I actually see them on the screen. They always just look the same in my mind.
Yeah.
So I guess with that, it's time to jump into Star Trek.
Let's do it.
Cheers. Star Trek.
That was a movie that we saw. That was the one we saw.
I always wait for what you're going to say because I always say the title of the movie and then you come up with something and I love it every time.
Of all the movies I've seen, that was certainly one of them. Before we get too much into that thriller of a movie, let's go to the wine scale.
Can you tell them about the wine scale? Because it's been a minute. This is the real wine scale.
Is a 0 to 10 scale. However, given that all the wines that we drink on this show are good wines, minus last season, the wine scale is heavily weighted, so a low score does not necessarily mean that it is a bad wine. That being said, I'm going to rate this one a 3.7. I'm
giving this one a 5.3.
Yeah, this one was just below I'd get this if I was out in a boot and saw this. It was
better today.
For sure.
It was, and that's
better today than the first night.
Last night,
over 2 nights, by the way.
Yes, this is a 2-night podcast because it was a long movie. Last night, I was like 4.7 maybe, like just under 5. Because like I still thought I think it was like mostly on our part that we maybe didn't age it well. I don't know how long we'd had it. I don't know what the deal was.
We can try to figure that out,
but I could see where it was good. Like I'd had so much more flavor than a lot of the other wines. It was not just like very flat like what we had before. It
tasted really bitter last night for some reason.
It was it was more like alcohol forward for me. Like that was the aggressive first note that I was getting. But then when I had it tonight, it was like so much better. And I was like, I would really enjoy this. I would drink this all day. 5.3.
Anyways.
So with that.
Moving on to the movie rating out of 10 though. I'll let you go first.
I knew that was coming. I think, what did you give the wine?
I don't remember.
You gave something in the 3s. I want
3.7.
I think you said 3.7 because I have locked in for the movie 3.7.
I'm going to give the movie a 4.9.
I was in the 4s last night. And then we started it tonight.
It's a very begrudging 4.9. I did not enjoy the movie.
Yep.
I can see the cultural significance of it. I can see a lot of what they were going for with that. It just was not my cup of tea.
100%. And I thought about giving it like a 4. But it is just so very not for me that I had to give it in the 3s. We can get into it more with all of our cultural questions. But yeah, I was not into it. Sorry for... And I appreciate that people are into it, for sure. Not for me. So should we jump into the movie description just to like start chipping away at all our thoughts?
Sure. So in the slowest of slow motion, a spaceship travels through space to figure out some sort of crazy weird object that's coming towards Earth, only to find out that it is Voyager 6, which was a spaceship that was never actually launched, but like supposedly in this timeline it did. That has become sentient and finds love and doesn't attack Earth.
And that whole description took about 12 seconds, and that's about how long the movie should have been.
Yep. There's a whole lot of dramatic pause in between in the movie form.
Every time anybody spoke a word, it was like, okay, now let me cut to every other character so that I can see them make like, I mean, like, I just get on with it. I don't care.
I'd love to know the actual like words to like the dialogue to non-dialogue sequences in this, because the pauses in this, the just time where they're just
how long it took them to get from the spaceship to or like from the one ship to the other ship at the very beginning. It was
the actual Enterprise.
It was, I mean, it was several minutes. In 2024, we would just, beam me up, Scotty. I'd be there.
I was a young, sprightly lad when they left for the Enterprise, and then look at me now. Those of you watching on YouTube, like, it aged me.
Yeah. Anyways, let me hop into the description. According to the TV, is when an unidentified alien destroys 3 powerful Klingon cruisers.
Sure.
Captain James T. Kirk returns to the newly transformed USS Enterprise to take command.
Leaving a whole lot to imagination there.
And then just leaves everything else out.
Yeah, I think that the person must have been writing that on a deadline, and the movie took way longer than they expected, and they were like, quick, we got to film the description before midnight, and he just threw some words together because they left a lot out there. I did too, but honestly, I didn't leave that much out.
You included a lot more than that did. Anyways, was the movie what you expected?
No, I thought there was going to be more action.
Agree.
Little laser gun fights maybe, or at least some sort of like punches.
Yep.
Anything. It was much more slow than I thought.
Yes, it had so much more 2001: A Space Odyssey of a like, let's hurry up and wait, than action like Star Wars. I give you that Star Wars is better than this.
Yeah, I'm sure some people want to fight us over that. Some people also want to fight me when I say that the 2009 Star Trek was far better than this. But like,
and I will say, like, I have never seen the show. I have never seen anything about this. Maybe if you loved the show, maybe this was like, you knew a lot going into this, and like that made a lot of this more interesting. Or like, also it was the 70s and it was just like, space, this is stuff I've never imagined before. And maybe 50 years later we're like not there, but like,
I imagine there were a lot of nerds like rubbing their belly buttons, geeking out over like the special effects and just like the whole like, oh my god, this looks so cool, what a cool concept.
Say it like that.
But like overall it was very much like yeah, okay, I see what you're getting at, like cool special effects, and then it just kept going.
Yeah, not good. How well did it age?
Well, the one we watched last night where they did some AI remaster aged terribly. Like everyone just looked terrible, did not look realistic, just faces looked off.
I am so glad we did this in 2 nights, because last night it was like it was like I was dreaming.
Yeah.
It felt like I was watching a dream while I was awake.
Yeah, very much. You were like living
like
in the Uncanny Valley. Just did not feel right. Like faces just looked wrong.
If you are watching it on Paramount Plus, you know what I'm talking about. It is not good.
I think this like AI remaster was relatively recent, so find a 1080p 4K remaster of it before the 2020s and it would be way better, because they didn't try to just fake everything. There was one scene where Bones McCoy was talking to Kirk, and like you could
around the like 54-minute mark.
Yeah, and like his face just looked so freaking distorted that like I just wanted to turn it off. It was just so bad.
Yeah, and it was honestly hard to tell of like, oh, is this because it's from the 70s and they were trying to like do some kind of technique at the time? And then it was like, no, it's just really bad. Someone nowadays was like, yep, let's put this out in the world.
Then going back and rewatching the non-AI remastered, you see that part and you're like, oh, okay. It just was kind of like slightly out of focus, a little like far away in the frame, and they don't need to AI remaster it. Yeah,
not good.
I could go off on that. Overall though, like concept wise, it was pretty slow.
But I mean, I thought
it's what we call a period piece, meaning it like took place in a certain time period, which in this time period was like far in the future. Nothing seemed too bad, other than it was very much felt like it was the 70s in the future.
Yes, 100%. And I think that's also like why I love like Disney's idea of the future is it's like the 60s in the future, the 50s in the future. Just like I find that's why I love the space genre, because obviously like it's advanced a lot now, but also not that much. But like the fashion is just different in like how their spacesuits literally look like straight out of the 70s.
Everyone thought that like we were just going to everything was going to be in the space, and then nothing really advanced after that. And it's been kind of weird where like if you look at cinema at the time, space should have been so much more part of our culture now, whereas nowadays we're kind of like, oh yeah, there's like satellites with powering our cell phones and all sorts of stuff like that, and GPS, but no one's really went out in like spaceships. We're not really venturing out through the ether. It's just
we're not on Mars yet. I mean, maybe we got some like satellites or like things,
rovers,
but no people or anything.
Yeah. But overall aging, like nothing super wrong there, unless you count the fact that what's his face was like a sexual predator, the commander on that
Stephen
ship.
Collins.
He did not age well in that.
He culturally and like the world did not age well.
Culturally did not age well.
Physically, he aged great.
Physically aged very well. Shockingly well.
Shockingly well. Yeah. Reverend Camden, for all of you Seventh Heaven fans out there, aged great. Like, I mean, overall aged well, but like made some very, very, very terrible choices in his life. And I couldn't unsee, I couldn't get past it. I knew it going into it. I have watched Seventh Heaven. I know all the drama. And I was like, ooh, you are creepy.
Read his Wikipedia page for a fun time. Yeah. Not fun time, a bad time.
I wish I hadn't watched it or like read it again right at the beginning of this, because it just, it's unsettling.
Could this movie be made today?
Sure.
Yes, it'd be way better. Hence, 2009 version is way better. Not the same exact story, but so much better. If you disagree, fight me. Don't fight me. I don't want to fight, but like it's a really, I really like the 2009 version. Not like this.
I mean, I think like the general storyline of like, I mean, is like a classic sci-fi space story. Like, we are in space. We are really advanced as a society. There are aliens. We figure out what's going on. There's some miscommunication. We try to figure out what's going on. But like, they took their sweet time telling that story, and it was boring.
In that vein, does the title fit the movie? Sure, a trek seems like a really long time. So yeah, they didn't go very far. Allegedly 6 hours at their whatever speeds from Earth. I would call it like star plotting, just plodding along, just eventually making it there.
Yeah, I wonder if we had seen the show, or we know anything about like what the show was, if that would give more of like a thing to it. One thing I would like to know more about is why they call it Star Trek a motion picture. Like,
I thought the original motion picture or something.
Just a quick Google search will tell us. But I feel like it seems like it's parodying itself with that title. To me, that's a joke.
The motion picture.
Yeah, Star Wars the motion, or I think I said a motion picture, but like, because I was typing out the original motion picture when I was trying to like fill out our like notes for it, and
I'm gonna look up and see how many episodes of the show came out before this, because it seems like, based on how it started with like Spock being on whatever his home planet was, don't kill me, being there.
We are not Trekkies, we don't know.
There was some sort of storyline of him being there, Vulcan. On planet Vulcan, and then coming back to the Enterprise, that they must have like left a season on a cliffhanger setting up this movie.
From my like,
it's like the Power Rangers motion picture.
Like the Power Rangers. If anybody's going to fight you on anything, I think it's the fact that you just compared to the Power Rangers.
My 90s kid, come at me.
I think from the light Wikipediaing I did, the show ended in the 60s. That it was like a big gap between when the show ended. But
They did look a lot older than
I could be incorrect, but I can look that up while you start answering the next question.
Were there any actors that went on to do bigger things?
I mean,
George Takei went on to be a big like internet personality, if you count that.
Stephen Collins was Reverend Camden.
Yeah. William Shatner became the Priceline negotiator.
I had to Google what commercial. I was like, I know him from a commercial. What commercial is it? And then I saw it was literally Priceline Negotiator was the name of it. And I was like, oh my God, it's amazing.
Yeah, to make people really angry, I saw those commercials for a while before one day my mom was like, that was Captain Kirk from Star Trek. And I'm like, wait, what?
He doesn't look the same. I don't like, it really took me a few minutes to into the movie to realize, that I knew William Shatner was in Star Trek, but I didn't click with me.
Yeah. He aged like great and terrible at the same time. The fact that he's very, very old, looks way younger than he is, but also like that's what he looked like then.
The fact that he's 93 now is wild.
If you showed me that guy in the 70s and you're like, what does he look like now? I'd say probably like a pile of dust. The fact that he like doesn't just look like a bunch of like skin cancer just attached to a skull, I'm shocked.
Yeah.
A, that he's still alive, and B, that he looks as good as he does.
Yeah. Well done. You aged well. It's called Star Trek, the original series. I don't know if that was the name in the 60s, probably, but it was from 1966 to 1969. It was on for 3 seasons. And then 10 years later, they came out with a movie.
Interesting.
I don't know if
I think we're going to have some fact snacks next week.
I think we're definitely going to have some fact snacks next week. I don't really see anything else. Oh, there's an animated series in the 70s. This is just my quick skimming through William Shatner's filmography. And then the movie, I guess. So there's a lot of time and space in between.
Well, knowing that, what impact do you think the movie had on pop culture?
I think the show was already super culturally significant. And then, I mean, from what I have lightly seen and what I know of the show and the movie, that it is a franchise that has people that are just in love with it, and it is continuing in other ways. And I don't know when the last Star Trek movie or anything came out, but I think it's definitely something that is big.
My theory is that Star Trek had like a cult following as like a show, ended. Star Wars, the movie trilogy, blew up, and the Star Trek people were like, oh my God, we got to capitalize on this. And were able to rally the troops, get most of the actors back on board, and put together a movie to try to capitalize on that based on the timelines of when this would have happened.
I would think that's probably correct.
Yeah. So I think it was less it having the impact and more being impacted by pop culture at the time, namely Star Wars.
And, whatever floats your boat. If you are a Trekkie, go for it. If you love Star Wars, do your thing. If you're like me and you're not like really into either one,
if you're a movie producer and you just want money, print money. That's apparently what they did.
Right.
Do you feel cultured after watching it?
Yes, I do. I don't know anything about Star Trek. Nothing. So to have seen something and to have been a part of the experience, I do feel cultured. Not in a great way, because it was not a great movie, but I appreciated that there was probably a lot of world building beforehand, and that was really hard for me as someone that knew nothing about it to be like, I don't know what you're talking about. I don't know what's going on.
I would say I feel a little bit cultured. I would like to also watch The Wrath of Khan, which was another Star Trek movie. I think it's the second one that came out after this. I don't think I feel as cultured watching this movie as I would if I'd watched the series, like even just like season 1 of the show. I think it was kind of part of knowing all of Star Trek or more of the Star Trek original culture than it is like pop culture of the time.
Okay. I appreciate that. Do you want to go first or do you want me to go first?
I'll go first. We can move into our notes.
All right. Go ahead.
First off is I wonder how they filmed the effect of the camera moving through the stars. I kind of like to understand. I was
wondering the same thing because they gave us 400 hours to think about it. And I was like, this is 1979, 78 maybe if they're editing it.
So they had one of those things where it's like a scene somewhat on a loop.
I was trying to decide if it was on a loop.
While people get seated in their seats, because you see this like movie through the stars sort of effect, and then you see the 20th Century Fox or something,
whatever,
Paramount,
the producing company,
probably Paramount something, intro, and then back into that same effect, which is kind of odd and just maybe it's not how it was originally.
I was wondering if that was like it was like remastered, so we just like put that in there so you knew who produced it or whatever, because it didn't feel natural to go back into the stars. Yeah,
but it was a cool effect, and it made me think while I was watching it how Star Wars did the whole scrolling through space type thing, and this kind of, it didn't feel like a loop. It felt like they were kind of moving through a whole bunch of space with the stars that I would be interested in knowing how they filmed that particular shot. Next note was that Shatner was only 48 in this movie and looks like a bronze statue.
I was going to say, I'm shocked he was 48. I would have said like 38 at least.
But he looked good. I in my notes I didn't say only. He was 48 in this. Looks like a bronze statue. It looks like he was younger than he was, but also the fact that he's still kicking today, and his skin and just overall body tone looked like that. I just imagined he just lived in a tanning bed and just would be just
chain smoking
skin melted off by
like
then. Yeah.
No, in the 70s.
Just what a guy.
Right? I mean, I was...
Whatever his genes are, man.
I was looking at his Wikipedia when the movie ended tonight, and I'm shocked that he's 93. I would have said 75, 78, like somewhere in that range, and that he's that much older than that. I'm like, oh my God.
Wild.
It's impressive.
Next note was that we had the world's slowest love cruise with Kirk and Scotty. Like, were they just trying to do a special, a visual effects like flex during that whole thing where they're just on this weird cruise out through to the Enterprise? I don't know if they were trying. It almost felt like when you're writing a paper for school and you know you have a word count and you're just like filling it with shit just to kind of get to
Oh
that
my
point.
God,
Like,
that's what this movie is.
it's like they decided like we want to be over
That's
2
it.
hours, and they just found a way to make it over 2 hours.
My God, that is the perfect analogy of like, let me fill this with a lot of fluff. Okay, let's watch them.
Yeah, we're just gonna have this orchestrated musical number while they just kind of float through space. It was cool, I'm sure, for the time, but
they could have accomplished it in like a tenth of the time.
yeah, if I recut this, it would be an hour-long movie.
Oh, 100%. I would love to just have like a file. I mean, as the one that edits the videos for this, I would love to have a file of this movie and be like, okay, well, we're going to cut the stars down to like 4 seconds. And then like just to go through and splice it and just to see how long would this movie be?
It's like here, okay, we see they're flying through space. We're going to cut out this minute segment. We're going to cut out this minute and a half segment. We're going to cut out this minute segment. And
We don't need to see everybody's facial reaction to that one word. All right. And then keep going. And
we get it. They're going through a wormhole. Like all those various like small things where it just was trying to like pound into your head. I don't know what. And it just took time. Next note was that Bones looks like Nick Offerman.
yes. In the start is when he cleans himself up, and it's really hard to imagine Nick Offerman without the full
Nick Offerman,
beard.
if he just went on like a pure cigarette diet for like a year, he's gonna have like his
And was out in the woods with letting his facial hair grow when Bones first
especially
appears.
before he shaved. Next note was that they get in the Enterprise and they just cruise on past Jupiter. And from what I know about space, to get from Earth to Jupiter would be quite a long time. You know,
Maybe like,
months,
like years and years and years.
And they're just like, okay, we're in our spaceship and right past Jupiter.
They didn't really have, I mean, so something that I don't know if it was in my notes, but I did want to talk about is like, this is definitely more of this is a sci-fi movie, not as much a specific space movie like a lot of the movies, especially that we have planned for later, are going to be. So it's going to be, I think, a little bit weird to compare this to a lot of the other ones we're going to watch, but they just definitely disregarded all science.
And I think that would piss people off, be like, oh, science, like Star Trek or the nerdy ones, to just be disregard, like, oh yeah, and they just like flew on past Jupiter. And then they get like their warp drive. I'm like, what?
And at the end, when they just like walk out of their spaceship inside of this other spaceship without spacesuits on, just their suede jackets, I don't know. That bothered me.
It must be a hell of a jacket. I don't know. Anyways, my next note was that I just hate AI remasters. We touched on this earlier, but
It was bad.
so unnecessary, lazy, just awful. Just did not look realistic. Took away from being able to watch the movie. I just couldn't unsee just how unnatural everything felt.
I knew it was bad last night, but then to start tonight's movie and be within the first 10 seconds, I was like, breath of fresh air. This is so much better.
Like watching it tonight where it wasn't the AI one, my first couple of thoughts were it looked a little blurry, harder to see, doesn't look as polished. But then after 10 seconds, you just don't notice that anymore. And
I thought it looked
with the
100%
AI remaster,
better.
you can't unsee just how bad every other scene looked, where you're like, oh, that person's face looks like it's like stapled onto another face, because the AI just could not get that right.
I thought everything looked better tonight. My instant first thought was like, this is so much clearer. I can see it so much better. Nothing is blurry. Nothing looks distorted.
Things that are supposed to be blurry looked the right kind of blurry.
Like background blurry. Not like his face is distorted. He looks like Voldemort. Like,
because some of the things last night, it's like, it's in the background, but you could tell like the AI remaster was making something in focus that should not be in focus way in the background. It just was distracting.
Yeah, it was horrible. I didn't realize. I mean, I knew it was bad, but seeing the actual cut we saw tonight, it was like, oh god, that was unwatchable.
Next, the trippy travel sequences throughout like the middle of the movie reminded me of 2001: A Space Odyssey, where they end there and it's just a whole bunch of long, uncut, weird, like, hey, what sort of like light flashy effects can we have?
We can do some graphics
move through space, and it just, we've touched on this or already mentioned this. It just was way too slow. And just when Space Odyssey was kind of like, okay, cool, this is really new for the time. It's how the movie ends. This, it was just like, okay, we know more happens after this. Just get to that point.
Yeah, I was over it, but I agree. I thought the same thing.
Next note was, could this movie be any fucking slower? Apparently, yes. Next note was that this felt a lot like Independence Day when they finally like get in the tractor beam and they're being pulled in. Feels like a bit about the scene in Independence Day where they kind of get pulled into the alien mothership, whatever. Likewise, I also got, you'll get this eventually. I got some Armageddon vibes for how they were mentioning this incoming alien, whatever ship
Language.
present thing.
Yeah.
No, not language, but like the incoming like spaceship thing and approaching Earth. Next note was that Spock just goes on this little voyage where he just like flies through a sphincter and then down through a vagina. And I'm like, what sort of symbology are they going for here?
I mean, I feel like space can often be
Like a
referred
vagina?
to in sexual ways, but that was aggressively sexual. My bigger concern with all that was like, if this was a 2024 movie, he would never come back. Like you would be like, okay, you've left this. Once you leave the ship in anything in the 2020s,
You try to YOLO something, you're gone.
you are dead. And I'm like, I know he is in so many sequels, whatever they come out with in the next 50 years after this comes out, that I know he's coming back. And nowadays I'm like, oh, you would die. You're dead the second you leave the ship.
If it were anyone else on the ship that had been like, oh, I'm going to go on a YOLO mission
Yeah.
through the V'ger sphincter thing in through the unknown, you'd be like, yep. And as soon as he pressed that button, gone.
Yeah.
His plot armor was strong.
Again, we've talked a lot on the podcast about how we watch For All Mankind on Apple TV, and that like the second that they push the button on his little keypad or whatever, I was like dead. Like on today's episode or today's day, like you push that button and like you are out.
Yeah, very ballsy. And then my last note was, what a hell of a love triangle where you've got like this guy on the ship trying to like love this alien who's also this commander or with the navigator on this ship or something, and just this weird relationship. And then all of a sudden they turn into a big light beam, and he realized that he loves her more than he loves being on the ship. And they had
lost me at that point. I was just like, all right, bye.
Yeah. Especially like knowing that actor. I'm like, okay, cool, fuck him. Then he dies, and then we'll just like,
and we're not going to see him anymore. Okay, bye.
We'll just cruise on off into space. All right.
Yeah. That was weird. I mean, a lot of the movie was weird, but like,
it seemed like it was going to be a big thing where he was going to somehow like win over this weird probe
and like be able to bring her back to the ship.
Find some sort of weakness there, but instead it was just kind of like, oh, they're going to turn into light beams. All right. Okay.
And his hair was all blown around. I did get a good chuckle out of that. I enjoyed that. That was funny to me. But
I went Super Saiyan. Yeah, it was weird.
Yeah. This is a weird movie. I'm really sorry to anybody that loves this movie. Just as a third-party outsider with no personal interest in the matter, it is not.
It was not our glass of wine, if you will.
It was not. So jumping into my notes, my first note is feeling like 2001: A Space Odyssey with a super long star intro. Obviously, 2001: A Space Odyssey is way longer of an intro, but I was just like, oh my God, we're still watching this? I literally reached across you to grab the remote to see how long into the movie we were because we were still watching.
It was like 3 minutes, but it felt like 3 years.
I was expecting like 8 minutes.
At least with Space Odyssey, with the monkeys, there was like something to see as opposed to just being like, oh, we're just like flying through.
But also,
stars.
doesn't it start with like a ship first?
Yeah.
The ship, the like weird
space baby or something.
Pan of the ship.
Of Space Odyssey? Don't they like show like kind of like a sunrise type thing? I don't know.
Oh, maybe they jumped right into it. I don't know. I've blacked a lot of that movie out because that was even weirder than this was.
This was heavily influenced by Space Odyssey.
Yes.
The late sequences, time sequences, everything was slow.
I mean, I feel like we should just like ding, like not a direct reference, but I mean, this was so much influenced by that. The, like you said, the weird trippy lights, the like, let's take our time showing this, like all of that stuff.
Yeah.
Was heavily influenced, ding, 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 but 2001: A Space Odyssey. My next note is I feel like we're about to go on another ride of like the sci-fi genre that we watched. We're starting back in the 70s, and so we have to like reset in time, and then to watch like technology progress, but also like film techniques progress and CGI, and just like to kind of reset back to that after. I mean, our sci-fi season feels like 100 years ago at this point, but just kind of going back to that same, like, okay, now we're going to go back through that same technology.
I think there's space sci-fi and space like astronaut. And those are two very different segments
For sure.
of movies and whatnot. This felt like someone took Space Mountain and made it into a movie and like a threw some, like, sprinkled some Star Trek in there. It felt very different. I think
It definitely felt like Space Mountain. I would have never put that together, but 100% I felt like I was riding Space Mountain.
Yeah, it's like they made the Space Mountain in Disneyland Paris Star Wars base. If they made one that was Star Trek based, they'd be like, okay, yes, this totally makes sense.
Yeah, I feel like the Disney World Space Mountain feels like Star Trek,
especially being like the 70s like vibe.
It's got that like era of what they thought space was going to be, and I just, and like the traveling through the stars and everything. I mean, you're in the stars for 2 minutes, and that's the whole intro to the movie.
You feel disoriented the whole time, not really sure what's going on. Yeah, but there's such a difference between what space sci-fi was thought of at the time and what like space astronaut travel everything else was. And I think we'll see kind of a mix of that throughout this season.
Yes. I think we'll definitely get into more of the like actual like space movies of like actual astronauts going into space in America, like based in reality, even if some of them are made up stories. Like I think we're going to pivot more to that, which I'm so excited for because I love so much. We do have a little bit of sci-fi in the beginning, like sci-fi space, but it'll be good. And kind of going on that, one of my other notes is I was not expecting to see San Fran. Like the fact that Star Trek has any basis in the reality of Earth was not on my radar at all.
Starts out in the, not quite the TMZ, but
I'm still not over
Cali,
that.
Yeah.
I mean, having been to San Francisco and like we said, we're going to Paso Robles. So we're going like to California soon. And just to like see Earth, I was like, no, this is not right. I was not prepared for this. Just really, I mean, obviously it was like a advanced future, what they thought San Fran was going to look like, but it was
looked mostly the same. Just
a couple things were different, but
clearly CGI'd some things on top of some existing structures.
Yeah. I was not prepared for that at all. But before that, my next note was I hate the font on the subtitles when Spock was on his home planet, and it was just like trying to be too futuristic and cute. But I was like, I'm also like have to read this at the rate that you're speaking, and it's too cutesy. It's not practical for being subtitles. So I just, as a viewer, hated that.
Yeah, it's cool. They've got like all these different Star Trek languages. I'm sure some people were like really actually like understanding it in real time. That level of nerd. But yeah, it was weird.
I did think about that too while I was watching it, is I feel like for a while we were like, oh, the authenticity of having these made up languages and like all these things. But I also kind of feel like now we're just like, I don't have time to read subtitles or like listen to somebody. Like I would rather like, we recently watched The Hunt for Red October and they started out speaking Russian and then they were like switched to speaking in English. And I was like,
just stop.
I was like, thank God I don't have to read the subtitles for this. Really in the beginning, I was like, oh my God, we're going to have to read subtitles forever. I'm not about this. And like, I appreciate authenticity in certain steps, like circumstances. But I also feel like for the everyday viewer, if you want people to watch it, just like speak it all in one language so that people can understand. And especially don't make up languages.
At the bottom of the screen, missing everything else on there.
Yeah, I feel like it's distracting to have to read subtitles if you don't need to. Okay, my next note is hard to follow. I mean, I knew nothing about Star Trek. I knew of the characters from just everyday living for 30 years, but I was like, at one point last night, I was like, I don't even know what they're doing. Like, I they're on a ship. Something feels kind of urgent, but I don't really know exactly what it is. I don't know.
Today, just thinking back to like what we'd watched last night, we watched the first hour. I was thinking to myself, what happened? Like what if I missed that first hour, would I feel like any more or less lost than I feel? And no, I felt exactly as lost as I would have if I just had missed the first hour. I think there was like some sort of like ship. I thought it was the Klingons. I think maybe the Klingons were like actually getting attacked as well as humans were getting attacked. And that was kind of setting up. I just didn't really understand what was going on. And then it was like the world's, like I said, longest little like travel sequences. And then finally they decided to like have a plot point. It seemed like the screenwriters must have had just like a whole bunch of visual effects stuff where they're like, we're gonna just show some visual effects until we have any idea of a script. And we'll interject some random like little fight sequences in the very beginning until we understand what the actual driving plot point is going to be.
I will say I did read last night, and I will look more into this for Facts Snacks for next week, that a lot of the actors were not super happy with the script and like how their characters were being portrayed. So I'm interested to kind of look a little deeper, like that they felt like they weren't true to the characters they were in the show. So I don't know how that will be, but I'm interested to kind of read a little more into that and like the development of this as a movie from the series. But yeah, I feel like they just weren't, like you said, weren't really sure what they were going to do. And they're like, and Spock's there. And there's Captain Kirk.
We have our movie. It's about an hour and 10 minutes, and we want to make it a 2-hour movie. So we're just going to just interject it with visual effects.
Yep. I'm sorry. I'm sorry to anybody that loves Star Trek who's probably already turned off their podcast at this point because they're mad at us. But I don't know. As someone who doesn't know anything, it's tough. But on that note, I have a plus. My next note is that the sets and the background acting are very impressive. Like they're in the San Francisco docking station or whatever that is, and like you're watching Captain Kirk talk to somebody, but everybody in the background is doing stuff. And it's not just like AI people or CGI people that they're putting in there. Like there are people that show up. The amount of extras that were on that set, this people that were like doing things in the background, like it was very detailed. Like they really thought about a lot of that stuff, and I will give them props for that.
For sure. Even when they get on Enterprise and they're in the wherever Scotty is, there's people in the background doing things from like the fact that they have them doing things and they're not just like framing it where there's a blank wall or they're just sitting there like, shrugging or just sitting around. They're actually like doing things. I did appreciate that as well. And
I also feel like that's something we've kind of lost nowadays is like so much had to be physical people, physical effects of like makeup or like puppets or things. Like I feel like there was a lot that they had to do before that because their computers and technology were not as advanced as they are today. And I think that adds a lot to a movie that we're kind of losing now with just like, we'll just like CGI some people there.
For sure. We talked about When Harry Met Sally.
Yes.
Earlier today, I think you and I talked about it.
We were just talking about it.
Yeah. And the famous cafe restaurant scene. There's a whole lot of people in that restaurant with them. And in the background, not just the other people that like all have what she's having, like type of thing. The whole restaurant is like completely full. And I saw like a YouTube video about like differences between then and now. And now like you see a restaurant in a movie and it's like just those two people. And like maybe you see like one other person in the background, but it's very much focused on them, cutting out all the background noise. And that's just, it makes the movies today seem so much colder, more isolated, not as like warm and realistic. It seems like it's so much more artificial.
100%.
And I think that having all those things, the little background things, the nuances there go so far into making the movie just feel more real.
Yeah. And I think I will forever be grateful that we decided to do this very silly podcast. And we've gone on, like we've started watching so many more movies just like outside of the podcast and just realizing how much like we're always like, I just really feel like a good 80s movie would be great. And I think that's because it's in that space before we got away from all like where we still
making, not just movies.
Yeah, it's not just like, let's pump out all this stuff. We can do all of this in post. Like it was really authentic and like you had to put so much more time and effort into things, but it really paid off in the long run. And I think that's kind of like my biggest takeaway of all of this. And so I appreciated that in this for sure. My last note that I have written down, and I have one more thing I want to say is that it was just, my note is so slow. Like, I'm like, okay, like we're still here. Like, I mean, we've beat we won't dwell on it, but like, oh my God, it was so slow. And then the one other thing I wanted to say is I do feel like there was like a really diverse cast in this. And I mean, not that like diversity didn't exist, but it seemed like there was like a lot of, I mean, they had like American Indians.
Yeah, just random like village people in there.
Which was weird, and I would like a little bit more of a, why were they there so dressed in traditional, not that they can't be there, but just like, it just.
Kind of like a space launch thing.
It was
on the Enterprise.
It seemed distracting from what this movie was trying to be. But I mean, like the women in the ship and there's like all the different races and stuff. It was very apparent, and but like appreciated.
Yeah. I feel like I remember seeing, I don't know if it was a documentary or interview, like kind of talking about that to an extent. But yeah, it did seem very progressive looking back now.
Mm-hmm. And also one other thing is the like relationship between Captain Kirk and Decker was really annoying. Mm-hmm. Like their like power struggle. I was like, okay, I get it.
Yeah.
You're two white dudes like fighting over command of this ship. Like, okay, we're over it.
Yeah. You got it in like the first, like them introducing each other or being introduced to each other and being like, oh, I'm the captain. No, I was the captain. Okay. Well, I see where this is going.
And 2 hours and 20 minutes later, I was like, yep. Okay. We still get it.
Mm-hmm.
Bye. Go float off into your light beam. We're done with this.
Felt very much forced. Like here's going to be a big like point of contention later in the movie.
Yeah. So those were just my other couple of observations that I didn't write down. But yeah, that concludes my notes on Star Trek. I will say the more we talked about it, I do feel like culturally, like cinematically, it was interesting. Like a lot of parts of it, not all of it, like parts of it were really interesting. And I'm excited to continue on the space journey.
Yeah. I would have done this one a little bit differently, but I'm excited to see what else we learn as we go through this. Some of these are going to be quite long and exhausting, but
yeah, I think we're gonna have a lot of 2-night podcasts in our future. Like if it's longer than 2 hours and 5 minutes,
and space is very vast, so it kind of makes sense, right?
Right. There's a lot to explore. All right. So I think with that, that wraps up our first episode of season 6 of Culture Night Pod. If you are enjoying the podcast and you are listening to us, if you could rate and review wherever you are getting your podcast, we would really appreciate it. And if you're watching on YouTube, if you want to subscribe to our channel, that way you can be notified when we upload new videos, and stay tuned for all of our future seasons and things. If you'd also like this video, that would be fantastic. And
if you got anything wrong, please call us out in the comments.
Yes,
and I will.
Any thoughts, comments, things to correct us on that we missed, please tell us. Like, we are just watching these movies, a couple of people enjoying a good night and a good bottle of wine. So please share your thoughts. And also you can follow us on Instagram. I share some reels sometimes and try to keep you posted of when our seasons come back. But we appreciate you being here, and we look forward to catching you in the next one.
Yep. Cheers.
See you next week.